There are some big enthusiasts you come across to big enthusiasts of gambit openings. Gambit openings, well, let me tell you something. There is no opening in chess, modern chess theory, that starts with or ends, that has word gambit in it, is entirely sound. There is a king's gambit. Well, queen's gambit is the only exception because this queen's gambit accepted or declined. It's not really a gambit when one side gives a pawn and gets it back 2 moves later. But real gambits are the gambits where you give up a pawn and you don't expect to get it back. So one of those gambits, and what I want to talk about now, is a Blackmar-Dimmer gambit. Blackmar-Dimmer gambit is, well, starts with moves. Well, it can start with any move. It can start with the move e4 or d4. Well, for example, after e4, knight f6, knight c3, d5, it started like Alekhine, and after d4, it turns into a Blackmar-Dimmer gambit. So, but normally Blackmar-Dimmer gambit starts with moves d4, knight f6, knight c3. Now white wants to play e4, and after d5 they play e4. You see, we got the same position as we started. We can start with the Alekhine defense. Anyway, after e4, there are number of continuations for black here. Main move is de, but simple move. If you want to do it, this gambit is not sound. Now, the simple way to get some, even not just equalize, but to get some advantage even for black, the simple way that you can learn real quick is knight takes e4. Now, knight takes e4, d takes e, and black is a pawn up. Now, what can we say about this position? Is there an immediate way? Is there a way where white can immediately get their pawn back? No, there isn't. Now, does white have enough development advantage, enough of any kind of advantage, to justify a loss of a central pawn? Absolutely not. There are 2 ways to play for white here. One way is to go f3, and the other way is to go bishop e3. f3 is the main move. That's how white would probably play if they play this opening against you. But however, let's look at bishop e3, bishop f5. We're going to go, and after knight e2, e6, and knight g3, we can go simply bishop g6. We're not going to give them back pawn. So h4, h5. And on bishop e2, we simply go knight to d7. And you see, seems like white has enough pressure on h5 pawn to take it and to win this pawn. But it's not so. After bishop takes h5, bishop takes h5, and knight takes h5, black can simply go g6, knight g3, and rook takes h4, and black is still up a pawn. Well, I don't think you're going to see anyone playing you in this position. Bishop e3 move. So the main move is f3. So let's continue with f3. We go bishop f5. Now, probably c3. What can white, well, of course black could have taken, but we don't want to develop white's pieces after ef. We don't want to help white to develop. No. We're going to develop our piece, and also we maintain the extra pawn. If white goes c3, for example, we go e6, bishop e3, and white is waiting when black is going to take on f3 to develop the knight with the tempo. Now we can go bishop e7. After fe, bishop takes e4, queen g4. I'm just giving you the game that was played that relatively good player played with black, and he got an advantage. Bishop g6, I'm just quoting you. There is no theory developed in this variation. So I'm just saying a simple way for black to get a better position. Knight d7, if knight d2, knight f6, white has absolutely nothing for a pawn. White has no initiative, and they have, well, knight d2 was not necessary, of course, but then if white goes bishop e2, then we go knight f6, queen g3, knight e4, and queen is very uncomfortable. And we having central position even after knight d5. We having central position, we're having an extra pawn, and there's nothing white has that we don't have, and white is a central pawn down. This is totally unsound opening, and you shouldn't waste much time studying it. You should just learn one line, the one I just showed you, and you're ready to crush this opening. That's a very convincing play to play against this opening. Again, quickly, d4, d5, well, it depends on what opening do you play, whether you play d5 for black or knight f6, or you can start with knight f6, and after knight c3 you go d5, and e4, again, knight takes e4. Simple, very easy way to get an advantage against totally unsound Black-Mortimer gambit. That's all you have to know about it. Bird opening is very interesting opening in the type of opening. This is a type of opening that reminds you like a Dutch defense for black with extra tempo if you play white. But who plays the bird opening? People who try to kill two birds. They try to get unusual type of position where they don't have to study much theory and where they get good possibilities of attack. It's an opening for lazy and at the same time ambitious players. So it's a rather rare combination, and if you are lazy, how can you be ambitious? It's almost a contradiction of facts, but they are players. They are lazy to study theory, and they are very ambitious to perform some kind of attack. So let's talk about f4, the bird opening. Best and obvious move to play for black is d5, and after knight f3, g6. Now, let me explain why I want to play g6 in so early stage of the game. The reason I want to play g6 is because if white plays bird defense, bird opening, I want to make sure they go with d3 or d4. I want to make sure they don't play, suppose if we played knight f6 on second move, they don't have an option to fianchetto their bishop on b2 where it would stand well, and then play e3. So by playing second move g6, we eliminate the b3 possibility. Now b3 is totally pointless because bishop g7, and whatever white does, if they do d4, they block this diagonal. If they do knight c3, knight doesn't stand well on c3 and can be and it's subject to get attacked. So obviously white should stick to e3 move. Another option for white in this position, e3 is the main move, but g3. So if they play so-called Leningrad variation of Dutch, that's something black plays with extra tempo. After g3, I would recommend to go bishop g2, bishop g7, bishop g2, knight f6, and if both sides castle and white goes d3, then black can simply play b6. That's what I would recommend. No c5. We play b6 and we wait for white to go e4. On knight c3, we go bishop b7. And if white goes knight e5, we go knight b to d7. Knight takes d7, queen takes d7. This is very good position for white. If white, for black, and if white plays e4, and after d takes c and d takes c, and black plays simply rook fd8, and you can tell black has an advantage here. For instance, if queen takes d1, we would like to take with a knight on queen takes d7, knight takes d7. Maybe knight goes to c5. Well, this is strictly positional concept. Now, what black would want to do is to play bishop takes c3. You see, when you fianchetto bishop on g7, you don't normally want to give it back for the knight because you weaken your you weaken your king position. So based on the pawn structure, but this is an end game, and if black goes now knight c5, black has big advantage in the opening in a pawn structure. So this position is after knight takes d7, where white is forced to play e5 practically. We can take on g2, and black is at least equal. They can even go f6 here, and they will be fine. E takes f, followed by f5. White has absolutely no advantage. So this is the way I would recommend to play if white tries to fianchetto their bishop. But if not, then we're going to get position after f4, d5, and we get knight f3, g6, then white will go e3. And on after e3, bishop g7, then, well, white has two ways to play. Either they can go d3 or they can go d4. So if they go d3, so this way they still may play e4 later in the game, and that's what they are hoping for. If they go d3, then we go knight to h6. I like knight on h6 because knight may possibly go to f5. Bishop e2, black castles, white castles, and black goes b6. You see, black simply wants to play bishop b7, and knight is going to go to f5 later. After e4, black also is getting an advantage here. D takes e, d takes e. Now, black exchanges queens, rook takes d1, bishop b7, and after e5, knight a6. Now you can see why black is better. White, first of all, white is overextended in its center, and black has very strongly placed, very well placed minor pieces. Knight may go to b4 or c5, the other knight goes to f5, bishop on g7 is relatively passive, but can be quickly brought back into the game by playing f6 and opening this h8, a1 diagonal. So this position is definitely good position for black. So let's go back now to the most expected continuation. In my opinion, most expected. Overall, bird's opening is not a popular opening, so f4, d5, knight f3, g6, e3, bishop g7, d4 probably. That's so-called stonewall system in Dutch defense played with extra tempo for white. But notice this is not acceptable for white, because if black plays it, black wants to get some kind of some kind of a stable position, and where white does not have easy breakthroughs. But here You cannot play this type of position, which is totally closed position, just because you have an extra tempo, because extra tempo, as we know, in closed positions are totally irrelevant. Not totally, almost irrelevant. So after d4, we can go simply knight h6. Now on bishop e2, we just castle, and if white castles, we go knight f5. And here is the plan for black. You see the weak square on e4, that's where knight wants to get. So we're going to go knight d6 and possibly get on e4, and the other knight is going to go from b8 to d7, f6, and also control the e4 square. e4 square is the key of whole position. Meanwhile, white does not have e5 square, because if they put some piece on e5 like knight, black can always play f6 and kick it out. So after knight f5, c3, we go knight d6, and on b3 we go knight d7. Our knight heading to f6 and e4. And after we go knight d7, knight e5, knight f6, and after h3 we go knight f to e4. See, we put one knight on e4, we put the f knight on e4. This is very important because we are intending to kick the knight, white's knight, by playing f6. Now after we played knight f to e4, queen e1, suppose white wants to play queen h4. Now we can go c5, try to open position in the center when we have superiority in the center. We have very good knight on e4, and after bishop a3, we play c takes d. Now if c takes d, black simply goes f6, and after knight d3, bishop f5, black has great position. And if white tries something different, like bishop takes d6 in this position, bishop takes d6, then e takes d6, and after knight f3, d takes c. This is just winning for black. So what white has to do now, they have to take on d4, and now after bishop f5, black simply has good size advantage. I think they have very well placed knight on e4. They can always kick black's knight, and they have the c file. This is an easy way to play, and again, we did not really exhaust every possibility and every variation here, but this is the plan. When you play against the openings that are passive for white, and this is relatively passive in early stage, all you need is a good plan, and you know how to develop your pieces. And if you do that, you're going to do very well in the bird opening, and also in any opening that it does not have good, healthy positional idea behind it. Call system is definitely belongs to the category of the openings where white does not need to know much or be prepared real well. They have to know one basic idea and a strategy, and they can play it. Obviously, if you do it this way, if you base your opening choice of your opening is based on getting through the opening easy way, you cannot count on any kind of advantage. So after d4, knight f6, knight f3, e6, e3, c5. White plays bishop d3, and white's idea here is to play bishop d3, c3, and knight d2. Of course, it can be done in any different move order, So we just pick random move order that white can play. You should not get confused if white chooses a slightly different move order. So after bishop d3, we go d5, white goes c3, we go bishop e7, white goes castle on knight d2, it doesn't matter, knight d2, castle, white castles, and b6. Now b6 is very interesting move. It looks like black wants to play bishop b7. But black also wants to play bishop a6. Bishop a6, trying to exchange white's good bishop. You see, white has good bishop on d3, and white has bad bishop on c1. So black tries to exchange white's good bishop by playing bishop a6, and if white prevents what they should do by playing queen e2, then we're simply developing bishop to b7. And after queen e2, bishop b7, well, what black should do here? Now, what's black's plan here? The best plan for queen e2, bishop b7, for white, is to take and go e4. This is actually the main idea of whole opening. White takes on c5, black takes, and go e4. Of course, white can also try to play knight e5, but then if white plays knight e5, even move b4, we could go bishop b7, and after f4, we can also play bishop a6, but bishop a6, white can take and go knight c6, which is also okay for black after queen d7. But if we choose to play bishop b7, and after f4, so-called stone wall, we can go knight to e4, and knight takes e4, de. Black has very fine position after bishop c2, f6, and after knight g4, simply bishop d5 to stop bishop b3. Black is doing very well, so knight c6 next move, followed by f5. Black has absolutely no problem. So that's why we stick to queen e2 move, and after bishop b7, white plays d takes c, b takes c, and e4. Okay, we played knight c6 here. Just simple developing move, and e5 is the move to expect from white. If white plays something like rook e1, we go queen c7, and e5, knight d7. It's almost the same thing. So e5, knight goes to d7, and white goes rook e1, black goes rook e8. Now, the purpose of rook e8 move, so sometimes if white conducts attack on a king side, we can play knight to f8. Black has good control of a center with a d5 and c5 pawn, so therefore black is doing real well. After knight f1, knight f8, and on bishop f4, black simply tries to expand on the queen side. And also, maybe they want to play queen b6 and bishop a6, as we already mentioned, to exchange the light square bishop. So a5 is a good move, and after rook a to d1, we go a4. Well, white does not have any good way to make any progress on a king side. So what I would think they should do is c4. Actually, this I'm just quoting you game between two good players. And after c4, let me tell you what happened. Black went knight d4, knight takes d4, c takes d4, and knight g3, now d takes c4. Now this position is already better for black. The reason why, after bishop takes c4, black goes knight g6, and after bishop c1, black goes queen to b6. You see, d4 pawn is a good pawn. It's not a weak pawn. Can be protected with the e-rook, rook a d8, rook goes to c8, and which we're going to see now in a few moves, black is going to have an advantage. After bishop d3, rook e to d8, obviously you don't want to put rook a to d8, since rook on e8 will be passive. Rook e to d8, and this position, after, maybe rook f1, white plays trying to go f4, And if we simply go bishop d5, attacking a2 pawn, and after a3, bishop b3, and rook on d to e1, rook c8. Well, just look at the position. Black's pieces stand much, much better than white's pieces. Now, f4 is not that good of a move because black can play bishop c2, and after bishop takes c2, d3 check will give black a winning position. What else can white do? Black is very safe, and they have very good views on a queen side, and they simply have, I think, sizable advantage. So position is simply not good for white. Of course, this is far from being the forced continuation for white, but when they play cold system against you, again, once more, I want to outline that what they want to do, they want to play very quiet opening with a possibility to open position in a later stage. Again, bishop d3, d5, castle, bishop e7, c3, castles, and knight d2. Only plan black has, and only plan there is in Cole's system, is to take on c5 at some point and go e4. So that's what we're preparing for by playing b6, and after queen e2, bishop b7, that's how we got into this position, dc, bc, e4, and knight c6. The position is 100% reliable for black. Black has no problems, totally equalized at least. And for white, I wouldn't recommend anyone to play this opening. English opening. There are various different ways to play against it. c4. So we already, on previous DVDs, I gave brief introduction to the e5 system, and I just outlined in a couple of minutes what is the plan for black here. But the other way to play against the English opening is c5. It's a more competitive way to play against it. More competitive when you're trying to get most out of this opening. So you're challenging white to the opening knowledge, to the knowledge of this opening. So c4, c5. Well, suppose white plays knight c3, and we play knight f6, and after knight f3, we play g6. Now, let me tell you a few things about this position. Why do we play on a second move knight f6 and then g6, and not knight c6 and after knight f3 followed by g6? This would be a wrong position. It's hard to imagine that position like we have right now on the board is not pleasant for black. Actually, it may even be a bad position because white has e3 move. And now after d4, black does not have enough time to meet good with a counterplay in its center because white is trying to get d4, go d5 with the tempo attacking black knight on c6. Let's see. For example, if black goes knight f6, white goes d4, and after c takes d, e takes d, and d5, this position is not that good for black because white goes c takes d, knight takes d5, and queen b3. And position that looks seemingly like normal position is not very good for black. black has choices, either play knight takes c3 or knight b6. After knight b6, d5, they are very uncomfortable with knight on c6. And if knight takes c3, white plays very strong in between move bishop c4, and black is in trouble. The reason why f7 pawn is hanging, and black must play either e6 or knight d5, bishop takes d5, and then e6. In both ways, white has an advantage. Let's go quickly through these variations. For example, if now knight d5, bishop takes d5, and e6, white plays bishop takes c6, check, pawn takes, and white castles. Bishop on c8 is not very good piece now for black. Bishop on c8 is really passive. Bishop g7, then bishop f4, and followed by rook c1, white will have an advantage here. So, and if black does not play knight d5, then in this case they have to play, after bishop c4, e6, and after b takes c, black is having problems again. If they go bishop g7, then white plays bishop a3, and if they go bishop e7, white plays bishop h6. In both cases, black is seemingly uncomfortable. So that's why it's important now we are looking for more competitive way to play in the opening. That's why it's important that after c4, c5, knight c3, we choose the correct move order. The correct move order is knight f6, and after knight f3, g6. Now, here, white has two ways to play. White has to determine what plan they want to play. They can go d4, where they get some superiority in the center, and they can play g3, simply not the g3, but e3. g3 will lead to the same d4 variation. After bishop g7, bishop g2, and castle, white will play d4, which will transpose to the variation we're about to analyze. So white has practically two plans: to play d4 or to play e3, followed by d4. Well, let's look at d4 variation. After g6, black played g6, d4, c takes d, knight takes d4, and black plays knight c6. Now here, white can go with g3 or with e4. After e4, we get 100% transposition to regular Marozzi-bind position of accelerated Draken, which is the part of our repertoire if you are following to my advices. So then e4 we are not going to analyze here because it's already fully covered in our accelerated Draken Marozzi-bind. So we look at g3 variation, bishop g7, bishop g2, black castles, and white castles. Now, this is typical and critical position of this variation of English defense. So there is a pawn sacrifice idea, d6, which is insufficient and not recommended to play for black, since after bishop takes c6, b takes c, knight takes c6, and if black plays queen c7, then knight d5 is very strong, and white has an advantage. So I don't recommend to play this pawn sacrifice because it's unsound. So the move, we want to play knight takes d4, Queen takes d4 and d6. Here is the position. Here is the basic position of this variation. The best move for white and most popular move in this position is queen d3. So white wants to play maybe bishop e3 and bishop d4, or maybe they want to play b3 and bishop b2. Black is not threatening to move their knight somewhere and attack white's king on d4. So white plays queen d3 just to prepare bishop e3. There is no need for queen d3, but white does that because they want to play bishop e3. That's why, not because black has some kind of threat. Now, there is also other moves. There are also other moves. For example, there is a queen h4 move. There is queen h4 move in this position with the idea to play bishop h6. That's not a dangerous move, and what black should do, simply play queen b6. Now, bishop h6 is not good since b2 pawn is hanging. So if white plays b3 here, then black goes bishop d7, and after bishop h6, bishop to c6, bishop takes g7, king takes g7, and after e4, that was played already in the tournament games. So black plays a5, and after rook a to b1 or knight d5. But in both cases, black has a good position. After rook a to b1, black can play a4 with the idea of taking a b, and playing rook a3. And if white plays b takes a, then after queen c5, all white pawns are weak. Or if black plays knight d5 instead, then bishop takes d5, e takes d, and black plays a4. You see that queen on h4 is totally out of play, and white's position on queen side may collapse at any time. So this is good position for white, and therefore for black. Therefore queen h4 is not a good move, and it's not something white plays often. It's been played once in a while, but it's a person who knows well how to play those positions. They would never play queen h4. So queen to d3 is the main continuation here. And after queen to d3, we play a6. Now this is a good move, and the idea of a6 move is to prepare b5. Obviously, we cannot go b5 right away because our rook is hanging. So, but the idea is to play rook b8 and possibly b5. So what should white do here? White can play bishop to e3 and to try to play possibly rook d1, rook c1, and c5. You see how there are two bishops aiming on queen side, and rooks are placed in the center. This is the best coordination white can dream of. So we have to be careful how we conduct our action in this position. After bishop to e3, we play knight g4. Well, white has to follow their plan, bishop d4, and we go knight e5. If white plays bishop takes e5, obviously they cannot get any advantage because black has now two bishops, very strong dark square bishop, and they're going to go rook b8, bishop e6. They have no problems, and they are very, very comfortable. So queen has to move, and queen has to move to d1. That's the only square They cannot go queen d2 because knight takes c4 attacks the queen. So queen goes to d1, and obviously we cannot play knight takes c4 since white wins after bishop takes g7, king takes g7, queen d4 check, knight e5, and f4, winning a piece. Of course, we cannot do this. So what we play after, in this position, after we played on bishop e3, after we played knight g4, bishop d4, and knight e5, queen d1. So here, after rook b8, white can play here rook c1, and we can play bishop to e6. And after b3, we can go b5, and we have no problems. Black is okay here. So bishop e3 may not be the best idea for white here. Well, suppose they play simply bishop to d2. Now, after bishop to d2, we want to play bishop f5. The idea of bishop f5 to force white to play e4. Now, white plays e4, and now we go bishop to e6. And black wants to play knight d7 and get the counterplay on white's c4 pawn. So the way game can continue is this. After e4, and we went bishop e6, now white has to play either rook c1 or knight d5. So but they first want to play b3, make sure that the pawn on b2 is not going to be hanging. Also protects the c4 pawn. It's a good move. Knight d7. Now we want to bring knight to e5 or c5 with some activity. Now after rook a to c1, we play knight c5. And if after queen e3, we can go b5. That's what black wanted. Black wanted to get b5 in and have active play on the queen side. C takes b, a takes b, and rook c2. Now, if knight takes b5, obviously we play rook takes a2, and we have great position. So if black plays rook c2, then white goes queen to white goes rook c2, black goes queen to d7, and after rook f to c1, we simply play b4, and after knight d5, white has absolutely no advantage because bishop takes d5, e takes d, and rook f to b8. Let's talk about this position for a second. Black has a better pawn structure because they have one pawn on a queen side holding two a2 and b3 pawns. So black also has powerful knight on c5. I would say black is at least equal, maybe a little more than that. Black has no problems. That is for sure. Now, that will approximately, that will about conclude our analysis of this variation of d4 variation of English, where we get positions very similar to accelerated Dragan-Maróczy bind. So we're talking about c4, c5, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, g6, d4. cd, knight takes d4, and knight c6. We, more or less, we covered, I gave you the basic ideas, couple of main variations, what we're playing for, and basically that's all you need to know to get reasonable position in this variation of English opening. Now we're going to go and look in the variation of English where white does not fianchetto the bishop on g3 and does not play d4 right away, which is c4, c5, knight c3, or knight f3. It doesn't matter which order white develops the knights. Knight f3, g6, and if they play e3. Now this is the variation we will cover now. White practically has to play d4 here, since that's why they played e3. And after d4, black has a couple of ways to play. First of all, they can castle here. And second, they can play c takes d. So I want to stick to c takes d variation. We have choices, but let me make this choice for you and advise you the move that gives black clear and satisfactory position. After c takes d and e takes d, obviously knight takes d4 makes no sense at all, since why did white play e3 then? E takes d and d5. Well, here white can play simply bishop e2 or queen b3 or bishop to g5. Now, they can also play c takes d. Those are the variations white has here. Well, let's go with the simplest one. C takes d, knight takes d5, and after bishop c4, we can play simply knight b6, and you do have a good position here, because after bishop b3, we just castle, and if white castles, we go knight c6, and we are perfectly safe and we're doing okay. After bishop e3, we can go simply knight a5 with the idea of knight takes b3 and bishop e6. That's what we want to do. So what c takes d variation does not promise any advantage to white. Well, one of the ambitious variations is bishop g5, and the way I would recommend to play after bishop g5 is simply knight e4. This is temporary pawn sacrifice, because white should play here c takes d. Well, not knight takes d5, this is a real bad move, knight takes d5, because we play knight takes g5, knight takes g5, and play pawn to e6. And you see now both white knights hang, and white is in real trouble. So after knight e4, white should play c takes d. And of course we can take knight takes c3, b takes c, and queen takes d5, which is also playable position, but I would recommend knight takes to g5 in this position, knight takes to g5, knight takes to g5, and simply castling. And position is good for black, because after bishop c4, well, actually, black can even go e5 in this position. So black wants to go e5 at some point. So white should go knight f3 voluntarily. And then after bishop g4 and bishop e2, black can go even queen b6. And later on, black will play simply bishop takes f3, followed by taking pawn on d4 with a queen or with a bishop. This position is perfectly safe for black. Now, what else can white play here? Now, if white plays bishop e2 move, well, of course, by playing simple move like bishop e2, you cannot count on any advantage for white. So black goes knight c6. After d5, bishop e2, black goes castling white castles, knight c6, and white has no advantage at all. If white goes h3 to prevent bishop g4, you can simply play bishop to e6, and after c5 go knight to e4. You see, now black has very active position, and some move like bishop e3. You can even play knight takes to c5, d takes c, and d4, getting your piece back and getting superior positions. Now, if you can tell easily that black's bishops are a lot more active than white's bishops. Black has dominating knight on d4, and c5 pawn will need some attention. So black is doing real well here. So white cannot just play 100% passively, because then they will have even disadvantage in position. So in this position, after d5, we covered bishop g5 move, we covered cd move, and there is a queen b3 move, also attacking the d5 pawn. We can simply play d takes c. This is the easy way to play. Bishop takes c4, we can simply castle, and after knight e5 go e6. And if white plays bishop e3, then we play simply knight c6. Knight takes c6, b takes c. Black is doing very fine. Castle, knight d5, and they have good knight on d5. Then they can play later either bishop d7, rook b8, or maybe even queen b6 and bishop a6, followed by that. Black definitely has no problems, maybe even better than that. Maybe black has a little better position. They also can play knight b6. Notice, and after bishop e2, bishop to b7. And they have very good position here. So this position is very satisfactory. So white does not have an advantage if in the position, in the opening position, white plays after c4, c5, knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, g6, they play e3, and after bishop g7, d4, you take c takes d, e takes d, go d5, and you guaranteed stable and the stable and good position without any problems in the opening. That will conclude coverage of this part of the English defense, how to play. That's another way to play against the English defense. We already mentioned on c4 you can play e5, but if you will play on c4, c5, I would say it's a lot more competitive way, and I would recommend to play like this. The opening we're going to discuss now is very popular. It's a lot more popular than it deserves to be. It's very popular for one reason only. You hardly have to study any theory. You have, one or two ideas, and you are ready to play. So opening I'm talking about is a London system. d4, knight f6, knight f3. Now, I'm talking about e6 players here. If we play, notice, you don't know after move knight f3, you don't know what opening white is intending to play. Because when you go e6, you have to be prepared for c4, and then we're going to go bishop b4 check, and we're going to play either Nimzo Indian or we're going to play against Bogo Indian. So when white did not, knight f3 is not an indication of any certain opening. So you go e6, and this way you prepared for anything white can do. And here, white plays bishop f4. And what's the idea behind bishop f4 move? White delays c4 and tries quickly to finish development, avoiding contact in the center. And this is the way, again, to avoid some modern theoretical variations. But anytime you do that, you gave up the right, you gave up the some advantage, so you cannot get an advantage anymore. So what you do after bishop f4 here with black, we can go c5. Now if we go c5, the normal move for white is to play e3 or c3. That's what they want to do. They want to play c3, e3, quickly develop the light square bishop and castle. After c5, e3, I would recommend for black to play b6, and here goes white's development. Bishop d3, bishop b7, knight d2, bishop e7, and they play c3. This is typical position for London system. Bishop can be on d3 or on e2. Black plays c takes d. Now, what should white do here? White can play c takes d or the e takes d. Now, if white takes c takes d, black can simply play knight c6 or maybe even bishop a6, exchanging this bishop. If black simply plays knight c6, position is totally equal. e4 is not good, I have to point to you, because after knight b4, bishop b1, and bishop a6, white may start experiencing certain problems. So the only continuation where white can try to justify their move order, their bishop f4 move, is by playing e takes d. And it looks like white has very promising position. They can castle, they can put the rook on e1, they have open file, and little superiority in the center. It's not exactly so. Now, c takes d, e takes d, we just castle with black, white castles, and we go d6. Notice we don't want to play d5 because we don't want to lock the light square bishop. So we play d6, and after queen e2, we play knight b to d7. After h3, we play knight b to d7 because we don't want to play knight c6, blocking our light square bishop again. Knight b to d7, h3, rook to e8. It's a slow development here. Knight to e4, and after knight, well, the other way white could have played, they could have played a4. Now, a4 contains some positional idea. White wants to go a5 and a6. After a5, if black takes, they may go knight b3 and take on a5 with a knight, getting a better pawn structure. However, after a4, which can go a6, and it's still there is no plan for white that can promise them any advantage. Bishop, rook e1, bishop f8. Anytime white goes knight e4, we can simply take on e4, bishop takes e4, bishop takes e4, queen takes e4, and here is some very important point in the strategy here. You see all white's pawn are on dark squares. So when we go knight f6, and after queen d3, we go knight d5, attacking the bishop, and then we can go simply queen d7, and we want to play b5. Now, you see, knight on f3 is restricted, bishop on g3 has no future, and black goes b5 next move, and having very good position. If white goes c4, black can simply go knight b4, and after queen b3, a5. having good position. Again, black's pieces have outposts. Bishop on f8 has a very good future. Bishop can play, black can play g6 and bishop g7. That's how we get better minor pieces, more active minor pieces. Now, this position, suppose white does not play a4, and if we go back in the position that we just had, if white doesn't go to a4, if they go simply knight e4, what should we do here? On knight e4, we can do the same thing. We have the same plan. There is no reason why we should do anything different. Knight takes, bishop takes, queen takes. And here we go knight f6. Pawn is on a7 still. Knight f6. And after queen e2 or queen d3, we go a6, and we have the same plan, b5. And if white goes a4, you see the similarity with the previous variation. We go knight d5, bishop g3, queen d7. Again, we want to go b5. We get almost identical position with a clear plan for black and no future for white. White has absolutely no advantage here. So black has done well. Black solved all the opening problems. The opening we want to discuss now is Sokolsky opening, which stands for International Master Alexei Sokolsky, that was in former Soviet Union, that developed this opening, or as they call here, orangutan, which is b4 first move. It definitely belongs to the category of unusual openings, and the idea of this opening is to discourage black's knight in some positions to go to c6, quickly develop bishop on b2, and get some kind of a pawn structure superiority. That's not the opening that can be recommended, because this opening violates basic principles of chess. Basic principles of chess say that you have to develop your minor pieces quick. Well, then you can say, well, white develops the bishop. But you have to conduct all your actions towards the center, and you have to develop pieces towards the center, and pawns also in the center. This move contradicts with this idea. So there are a number of ways to play, a lot of ways to play, and almost here is almost no wrong way to play for black. Well, I can only recommend one way to play. Well, if you have some other preferred way to play, be my guest and you can use that. But easiest way to play against this opening is to go e5, and after bishop b2, not to go f6, like theory recommends, or d6, but simply the simplest way. Bishop takes b4, bishop takes e5, and now we get the position where we took the wing pawn on b4 and we gave the central pawn on e5. But why did we do that? Okay, we developed the bishop from f8 to b4. That's developed piece. White took with the bishop central pawn of ours, but bishop was already developed. Bishop on e5 cannot stand long there, so it will have to move again. So that means white will be making 3 moves with the same piece in the opening. Black will have superiority in development. Well, white played bishop takes e5, knight f6. Black develops its pieces quickly. e3, we castle quickly, and after knight f3, rook e8. You see, black is ahead in development. After rook e8, bishop e2, and we play d5. We will kick the bishop on e5 much later with knight c6 move. After d5, if white castles, and notice that they can also play c4, try to exchange those pawns and get more superiority in in their pawn structure, like more central pawns. But after c4, we simply take on c4, and when bishop takes c4, we can go knight c6, and on bishop b2, bishop e6. And on bishop takes c6, rook takes c6. You see that black is fully developed. Black is fully developed, and if white castles, I don't know, maybe can black go queen d3, or maybe they can go queen d7 and rook e8. Black has beautiful position here. So if white does not play c4, but they try, however, to finish development by castling, so what I would recommend here, to go c5, and after c4, knight c6, and after bishop b2, d4. You see, black has definite pressure in the center. They are threatening to play d3, and well, the bishop on c8, of course, and black has clearly better position. That's an easy way to play for black. So what you do